Thus, the moral worth of an action does not lie in the effect expected from it, nor in any principle of action which requires to borrow its motive from this expected effect. Immanuel Kant. To Kant, what makes a good person is not good deeds. Our actions can have legality, that is, they can be in accordance with the moral law, but that in itself doesn't mean that they are moral actions. Actions as such that we choose to do are not good or bad. Rather, to Kant, it is the will that can have and should have morality. Whether our actions really show that we are good depends entirely on whether they stem from a good will, that is, a will that wants to do what is right, that wants to follow the moral law simply because it is the right thing to do, not for other selfish reasons, or whether these actions just happen to be in accordance with the moral law, but are done out of some other reason. That is what I already explained in my previous lecture. And there I already said that this moral philosophy of Kant's, this emphasis on the good will, is actually one of the great merits of his moral philosophy. But there is one thing that I left out in that previous lecture and that I want to focus on now. And that is that there is one more huge advantage to this moral philosophy, to looking at things this way, that morality is not about our actions, but rather it's about our will. Which of course doesn't mean that actions are unimportant. I explained in the previous lecture that will is not the same as mere intentions or good wishes. So to Kant, a truly good will lead to certain actions. Good will try to do as best as he can, but still it's not the actions as such that matter, it's the will. And one advantage of this is that it completely destroys all kinds of consequentialism. Now, consequentialism in practical philosophy means any sort of principle that says what matters is the outcome. What matters is the consequence, hence the name, of our actions. Does it have good consequences or does it have bad consequences? The most well-known, most prominent form of consequentialism is probably utilitarianism, which says that we should always do what is most useful, which in turn is defined usually as doing that which brings the greatest happiness to the greatest number of people, or which prevents the greatest pain for the greatest number of people. But of course, consequentialism could also be any other sort of principle that says it is the consequences of our actions that matter. It doesn't have to be the consequences of happiness. And consequentialism, especially in this form of utilitarianism, is terribly widespread. Unaufklärt people are usually consequentialists. And it is probably one of the greatest problems we have right now in this world. And I don't see this world getting any better as long as people don't stop being consequentialists. So you could say ironically that it will have very bad consequences if all that people care about is preventing bad consequences and getting to good consequences. Kant, as I said, is only focused on the goodwill. So it doesn't matter what the result is so much. It matters what we wanted, which is the opposite of consequentialism. And with that, with saying at one point that the good will is like a jewel which shines on its own, which doesn't need a foil. With that, Kant is once more in accordance with the morality of Jesus. Just think of the story in the Bible of the sinful woman, often later associated with Mary Magdalene, who washes Jesus's feet with expensive oil. And when the disciples see that, especially Judas, he criticizes that. He says, "Oh, that's such a waste. That expensive oil, it could have been sold, and then we would have had money, and we could have given it to the poor." So he is calculating. He is applying utilitarianism. He is asking what would have been the most useful use of that oil. He speaks as a proponent of what is nowadays called effective altruism, which is this whole ideology that a lot of these billionaire tech bros subscribe to, that says, sure, you should donate money, but for the best possible outcome. Don't waste it on just feeding the hungry or whatever. But Jesus seems to not agree with that. And with Jesus and with Kant, we can say, okay, maybe you are right in your calculations. Maybe there could have been better consequences by selling that oil. But what matters is, so to say, what is in the heart. What matters is the goodwill of this woman who genuinely wanted to do something good out of her love for Jesus. And that is probably what will get her into heaven. When she stands before God, he probably won't do these small-minded calculations and say, "Oh no, you go to hell because you could have achieved better results by selling that oil." No. But anyways, I want to first point out what this consequentialism, if you were consistent about it, would lead to. In other words, what the consequences of such a consequentialism would be. Recently, I had a conversation with someone who watches these lectures, or rather the parallel German lectures, and who booked me for some philosophy lessons, for some philosophical talks, which is something you can do. If you want to book me, shoot me an email. I'm always open to help people out. And he is someone who's working in preventing addictions. So he's working with people who take drugs, who are addicted. He's trying to help them. And he said to me, what I'm doing is obviously something good, something meaningful. It's obviously helping people. But when I think about something like the climate crisis, I wonder, aren't there more pressing issues in the world? Shouldn't I drop my work and rather focus on, for example, preventing the climate emergency? Because to be sure, I might help some drug addicts, and maybe I even prevent a few people from dying because of their addiction eventually. But what is a few dozen or hundred or thousand or even million deaths by drugs every year as compared to the damage the climate emergency will cause? And this is consequentialist or utilitarian thinking, right? Saying it's not enough to have goodwill and to do something good. Rather, you need to calculate which good action would be the most effective, would have the best results. And to that I answered, to be sure, you can look at things that way. Then, okay, maybe you would have to drop your work in addiction prevention. But the same would be true for other people and their work, right? Like teachers, firefighters, physicians. Surely their work is needed and helps people, but that too seems trivial and just a drop in the ocean compared to the damage the climate emergency is causing and will be causing. So shouldn't they too drop their jobs? What's a few hundred children that don't get schooled, or what's a few dozen buildings that burn down, if instead you can put your time and energy into preventing climate collapse? But then, if you think further, even fighting the climate emergency could turn out to not be all that important in the grand scheme of things. And this could lead you, this consequentialist thinking, this could lead you to the ideology of long-termism, which is an ideology that, these tech fascists and oligarchs like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk subscribe to, right? This ideology, as the name suggests, is about long-term thinking. It says that we should think not in years or decades or even centuries, but more like in millennia. And we should think about what would really advance humanity. And the justification or rationalization for such people to not use their stolen wealth, because it's of course stolen, maybe not necessarily stolen if you go by the laws that we do have, but stolen if we go by the laws that we should have. You cannot be a moral billionaire. It's just not possible. You can only get that much money by profiting from an unjust system. But this is something I cannot explain further here. I would have to go into Fichte's philosophy of rights. But okay, they have this stolen wealth. Now, why don't they use it to, I don't know, fight world hunger or, once again, fight the climate crisis? Well, rather someone like Elon Musk, he uses his wealth to colonize Mars. Or they want to develop AI or whatever. And they would say, if they follow this ideology of long-termism, they would say, well, if we get people to Mars, we get a whole new colony, a whole new place for humans to live, and then there will be further development. People will spread from Mars out of the solar system to other planets, and eventually in the next thousands of years or million years to come, we can colonize the whole galaxy. And according to their logic, sure, there are 8 billion people on Earth right now. Sure, we could use all our resources and time and energy and money to make life for these 8 billion people perfect. Even if that works out, though, as long as we stay on Earth, that means we prevent not further 8 billion, but further 8 trillion or 8 fantastillion people who could have lived on other planets and could have lived a perfect life there, we prevent them from even being born. On the other hand, if we just get a few thousand humans to Mars, even if the Earth is completely ruined, even if 8 billion people on Earth, or close to 8 billion, die in nuclear war and a climate emergency or whatever, eventually the survivors on Earth and those we got onto Mars, they will repopulate, they will grow to be more than 8 billion. They will spread onto other solar systems and other planets, and there will be way, way, way more. Billions upon billions upon billions of people who can live a happy, perfect life. So, all in all, it will be a net positive, and those few millions or billions we sacrificed here on Earth, they will not matter in the grand scheme of things. So if you start like that, saying, I should not take care of minor problems because we have bigger problems here on Earth, well, if you think that through, you should also say, I should not care even about the biggest problems on Earth, because I could rather care about getting humans off Earth and getting them to colonize the whole galaxy. And this ideology is a totalitarian ideology. It very well fits how Hannah Arendt describes totalitarianism, which is never in the present. Being aufklärt is about being in the present. But this totalitarianism is always about some future. It always sacrifices the present for the future. That's what the Bolsheviks did. That's what the Nazis did for some future classless society or master race and 1,000-year Reich. You are willing to sacrifice millions, and not just of your enemies, not just of the Jews or the bourgeois classes, but of your own people that you claim to fight for. You're willing to sacrifice those for some future. And of course, the future never comes. Of course, when the future has become present, you will just look at the next future, right? Like with this long-termism, sure, we can try to colonize the whole galaxy. When we are done with that, we can try to colonize other galaxies. There will never be an end to it. But this is what consequentialist thinking, if you really think it through, has to lead to. It has to lead to this totalitarian thinking. I'm not accusing every single person who thinks in consequentialist terms to have this sort of ideology, but that's just because most people are inconsistent, because most people don't think to the end, to the logical conclusions. That's in fact also what Arendt says about totalitarianism. It takes ideologies that have been there before in a non-totalitarian way, and all it does is think them through, following the logical necessity to its final conclusion. With Kant, we can insist it's not about best possible consequences. That doesn't decide whether an action is moral or not, but rather it is about the will from which this action flows. So one person might find a cure for cancer, another person might help the old lady who lives in this building to carry her groceries upstairs. Surely the first person has done an action with much better, much more helpful for many people consequences, to be sure. But that doesn't mean that the first person is necessarily the morally better person, because maybe the guy who carries the groceries upstairs does it out of goodwill, while maybe the guy who cured cancer just wanted to make money from it or to get fame and a Nobel Prize. So while the consequences of an action can be good, that doesn't mean that the person who did it really did it out of goodwill necessarily. But this consequentialist thinking, as I said, it dominates our world nowadays. You just have to look into politics. In politics, we always argue in consequentialist ways that we need to do evil because otherwise something terrible will happen, right? So, for example, the climate debate. When we say we need to change our way of living, we need to do something and urgently about the climate crisis, then a lot of people will say, "Oh, but that would go against our economy. We would have no growth anymore. We would have shrinking of the economy. That would go against our standard of living." Here in Germany, often people say, "Oh, do you want us to go back to the Middle Ages?" To which the only sensible reply, of course, is, well, the Middle Ages might not have been perfect, but they did work. Like, people lived in the Middle Ages for actually the whole Middle Ages, which is like 1,000 years. So at least that can work. We have seen that work. What we have not seen work yet is humans living under 5-degree warming. That is something that they have never had to do in their history. So, yes, if it came down to that, I would actually prefer going back to the Middle Ages. But of course, that's stupid polemics. No one is saying that to save the climate, we have to go back to the technological standard of the Middle Ages. I mean, even back in the 50s, which was not the Middle Ages, which was not without all luxury, even back then, people lived without harming the climate in the degree we do now. Of course, it had already started, but not even nearly to the degree now. So no one is saying that we have to let go of all technology, of course. But even if we did, I would still consider that a better choice than warming the planet till it's unlivable. Or likewise, when it comes to how we deal with despotic regimes, like when you say, well, we shouldn't trade with a despotic state like China, which is committing a genocide, which is suppressing its people, or we shouldn't stay with a we shouldn't trade with a despotic state like Saudi Arabia, which fought a bloody war in Yemen, which shoots at refugees at its borders, or has soldiers forcing refugees at gunpoint to rape other refugees when trying to cross the borders, which literally kills and cuts into pieces critical journalists. We shouldn't trade with them. We shouldn't trade, of course, with a despotic, aggressive, warmongering empire like Muscovy. Then you will have people saying, I mean, this is right. This shouldn't be a controversial statement. This is just what you will say as a moral person. As a moral person, you will not want to shake a hand which has blood sticking to it. But then the consequentialists will come and say, "Oh, but that will destroy our economy. We cannot stop trading with them. We need that. Otherwise, everything will go down here." Or when you say, "There's refugees, they need our help. We cannot just let them drown in the Mediterranean Sea. We cannot just push them back to Africa. We cannot just pay regimes in, let's say, Libya to push them into the desert or to put them into concentration camps. We need to take them in. Which again is just, there's nothing to argue here. This is just what the moral law says. There's only two possible positions here, the moral position or the position that you can only take if you are scum. But then the consequentialists will take the position that only scum could take, but will argue that, oh, we have to take this position. Because otherwise, if we take in the refugees, it will cause so much trouble. They are all terrorists, and they are all murderers and rapists, and they are all parasites anyway. They will just live off of our social security here. So always, what is interesting, what is noteworthy, is these people do not say you are morally wrong. The position that you claim is good is not truly morally good. Our position is morally good. That's not what they are saying. What they are saying is our position is the only one that works. They refuse to engage in the actual moral debate, and they just say, okay, but we have to do this. There's no other way, because otherwise there would be bad consequences. Now, we could argue if these proposed horror scenarios are even true. If taking in refugees will really lead to chaos in our societies, if doing actual radical climate action will really ruin our societies and our lifestyle, if disengaging from trade and from our dependence from despotic regimes will really ruin our own way of living. But I don't even want to engage in those discussions here. Let's say all these horror scenarios are true. That doesn't matter from a moral perspective, because that still means that you are taking a selfish position, that you are saying, okay, my lifestyle, my luxury, my wealth, my comfort is more important to me than other people, and I am willing to support people dying, people being put into concentration camps, people being starved, being tortured, in order to keep my comfortable lifestyle. And of course, this is not new, this way of doing politics. Hannah Arendt has pointed out that the greatest crimes in history in the 20th century were done in the name of necessity. People didn't say, oh, we are going to kill millions of people, we are going to commit genocide because we want to, because it's the right thing to do. But rather they said, we have to, because otherwise terrible things will happen. The Nazis said, we have to kill the Jews. The Jews are responsible for Germany losing the First World War, are responsible for the hunger and economic crisis at that time. So, in order to prevent this from happening again, we have to kill off the Jews. And all of the Jews, right? As Himmler, the leader of the SS, said in a famous speech, he talked about what is to be done with the women and the children, and he concluded that if they just kill the men, that will maybe be sufficient for now, but that means that they, the Nazis, the Germans, would burden their own children with having to be plagued by the children of their father's victims. That would mean that these Jewish children would be allowed to grow up to take revenge on the Germans' own children. So he concluded, better to get rid of the children now. And this is not something special. This is very, very normal, common genocidal logic. When you get to a certain level of crimes against humanity that you commit against another group, against another people, there comes a point where you cannot just stop, at least in your own mind. You cannot just stop because you think, after what we have done, after the terrible acts we have committed, they will never let this go. They will never forgive us. They will want to take revenge. So now we have to finish the job, so to say, or else we will be the victims, or our children will be. I mean, listen to what Israelis are saying right now. They are saying precisely that. I mean, it's normal right now in Israeli TV and Israeli talk shows to discuss murdering 4-year-old children. And there are people, politicians, moderators, influencers, who say the children are the enemy. And to say it's not enough to defeat Hamas now, to kill off the grown-up Hamas fighters, because those children, after what we have done to them, after what they suffered, after how they have been starved, and how many of them have been amputated, often without anesthetics, after we killed their fathers and mothers and uncles and aunts and siblings and whatever, they will grow up to become Hamas, or even worse, they will want to take revenge. So that is the Israeli mindset right now, right? Not of all of them, of course, but of a large majority of Israel. Whether they admit it or whether they think it in a more unconscious way, but they think, after how we responded to October the 7th, we can never sleep securely anymore as long as there's still a Gaza with Palestinians left at our doorstep. There will be dozens and hundreds of more October the 7th. They will want to take revenge, so it is necessary to kill them all. Or to drive them away, at least, to ethnically cleanse the Gaza Strip. So, as Arendt says, the biggest crimes in history, they are done in the name of necessity. People like, that is unaufklärt people who always have this victim posture, they like to hide behind some alleged necessity. They like to refuse to take responsibility for their actions and to claim that they had to act in this manner. And of course, the must, the have to, is the death of the shall. If there is necessity, there is no freedom. There is no responsibility. There is no morality, no moral duty. That depends on there being freedom. And that is precisely why this consequentialist thinking, why it is so dangerous. But let's move away from politics and from these grand matters, and let's look more at daily life. It is consequentialism, and only consequentialism, which is responsible for people's belief in small, in harmless, in petty offenses. I mean, people are doing immoral things daily. Just look at the petty theft that people commit, right? Like stealing when you are on vacation in some hotel, stealing the towels with the hotel logo. Or here in Germany, we have these famous Christmas markets, right? And You can get mulled wine there in these mugs, and people constantly steal these mugs. Such things. They are obviously immoral things to do. They are obviously what you shouldn't do. So how can people justify this? Probably through consequentialism. Probably they are telling themselves, "Oh, it's not such a big deal. I mean, I'm not really harming anyone. It's not like I'm committing a murder here. I'm just taking with me a towel. It's not even causing a big material damage. Like the hotel is probably rich enough. It can probably spare one towel." Um, Kant would stress that there are no small crimes. There are only crimes. Doesn't matter how big or small. Because once again, Kant doesn't look at the consequences. To be sure, if you are unaufklärt and therefore an empiricist, therefore a slave to your sensuality, then you will look only at the actual consequences of an action in this sensual world, and you will say, oh, okay, this action has very bad consequences, people are dying because of that action, okay, but here this action, a towel is stolen, doesn't have such bad consequences, so it's not such a big deal. But once again, what Kant looks at is the character that someone has, or the lack of character. What Kant looks at is the principles, the maxims that someone follows. I explained that further in my lecture on the significance of character and being principled, and also in my lectures on the categorical imperative. If you have this maxim that says, I don't have to submit to the moral law, I don't have to be a decent, law abiding person, but rather this highness, this majesty, this high importance that I am above the law. Meaning, I get to decide whether in a given situation I feel like acting according to the law, or whether I feel like the law doesn't matter here, the law doesn't apply here. I am the judge that is above the law, and I can decide that in this case, a breach of the law is okay. If this is my maxim, if this is how I live my life, then it is just a matter of circumstance whether this maxim will only lead to a small petty theft that, to be sure, doesn't harm anyone all that much, or whether that maxim will lead to something much more terrible. I talked about this in the previous lecture on the goodwill. That a lot, according to Kant, a lot of the virtue, a lot of the vice in the world, a lot of the good deeds, a lot of the bad deeds are just a matter of circumstances. Put someone with the very same will, with the very same character or lack of character that he has, that he displays in this situation, put him into an entirely different situation, and that very same will of his will necessarily lead to these or that actions. So if you have this will, if you think you are above the law, maybe the circumstances of your life, luckily, lead to you never committing huge crimes. But that is not because you are such a good person. That's just because you never had the opportunity or the occasions that drove you to bigger crimes. You would probably be capable of bigger crimes. And indeed, I would claim, if you really look at such a person, like if you got to spend some days with someone who, let's say, steals towels in the hotel, and to observe him for some time, you would notice it's never just a towel. Like, these people are not good people in every other situation and then steal a towel. No, you would notice him again and again acting like an asshole, being, I don't know, a bad partner to his wife, or uh, treating his children badly, being an asshole to his colleagues, whatever. It's never just a towel. But there's also another form of this consequentialism that I observe often. Often it's not that people justify doing evil actions by saying, oh, if I don't do it, terrible things will happen, it's necessary that I do it. Or by saying, well, if I do it, nothing all that bad is gonna happen. It's really not that bad, so it's fine if I do it. But rather, often people will justify doing evil things simply by saying, well, if I don't do it, nothing good will happen. It won't improve things, so I might as well continue doing it. Right? This is very much how we deal with the climate crisis, both on a national level as well as on a personal level. On a national level, people will say, oh, why should we put in all the effort and sacrifice some of our wealth, some of our luxury to become climate neutral as a country? If other countries don't do the same, it won't help. Our country, again, it's just a drop in the ocean. Our country doesn't do all that much. Like here in Germany, you constantly hear people saying, oh, we are responsible for only 2% of the emissions. China is much worse, so why shouldn't the Chinese start first? Of course, the argument is very dishonest in many ways. I mean, starting with the fact that, okay, maybe Germany is responsible for only 2% of emissions. Doesn't sound like much, but Germany does not have 2% of the world population. So, in any case, we emit more than we should. And also, of course, secondly, it's a dishonest calculation. We shouldn't calculate a country's emissions by how much carbon is emitted within that country's borders, but rather by how much carbon is emitted for that country. I mean, China is emitting so much largely because it is our German Western workshop, right? Because it produces goods that we consume. If a German buys a car and the parts of the car were produced in China, then they were produced for him. If there was no market in Germany for these cars, and of course this also goes for other Western countries, then there would be less production and therefore less emission in China. So it is terribly dishonest to claim that this is just China's fault, as if they are just emitting so much for fun, or as if they were just producing for themselves. They are producing for us. Those are our emissions, even if they have been outsourced. And then, of course, even from a consequentialist standpoint, you could argue against this, right? Even from a consequentialist standpoint, you could say, if we, let's say Germany, if we become climate neutral, sure, it will not have immediate meaningful consequences for the climate as such, but it might have political consequences. Like we could be a good example to other countries. Maybe other countries would say, oh, it actually works. You can become climate neutral without ruining your country. So maybe we should do it too. Or we would have our word would have more weight in international conferences in diplomacy, like when we would tell, for example, China to lower their emissions, they could no longer point at us and say, you are hypocrites, why don't you start with yours? But rather, we could say, we did start with ours, we did our homework, now it's your turn. So even from a consequentialist standpoint, it would make sense to lower our emissions. But the point is that the argument goes, if we lower our emissions, no good consequences will come out of it, so why should we bother? And as I said, this also goes on a personal level, right? Like people will say, okay, sure, flying might be bad, but why should I stop flying? Why should I not get to have my vacation as long as everybody else flies? If one less person flies, or if one less person eats meat or whatever, this is not gonna go change anything. Of course, everybody else doesn't fly. If you fly, you're part of a very, very tiny elite that for some reason believes it has the right to ruin life, to ruin the planet for everybody else, the living and the unborn people. Because it is only 3% of the world population that flies once a year or more often. 97% of the people on Earth fly less than once a year, if at all. Most people, of course, have never been in a plane. But that aside, this argument is something you always hear, not just when it comes to the climate, of course. It's also when it comes to other matters of, let's say, consumerism and questions of boycott. People will always excuse themselves, saying, well, okay, what I'm participating in here might be bad, but it will still be bad if I stop participating, so I might as well enjoy myself, right? So I live here in Berlin, in the area that has lots of Turkish and Arabic people, and I've talked Aufklärung at schools, and when I talk to these young Mohammedan teenagers, this is always this is one of the first arguments that always comes up when I point out, because many of them, they are very obsessed with designer clothing, with new shoes. When I point out this is done from slave labor, this is done through exploitation. Or many of them, they are obsessed with football. So when I pointed out that the World Cup, the last World Cup in Qatar, how the stadiums were built through slave labor, how many people died building them, the first argument is always, okay, maybe that may be, but what difference does it make if I, as a single individual, stop buying this stuff? Or what difference does it make? The stadiums have already been built, the World Cup has already been given to Qatar. Now I might as well watch the matches and enjoy. If I don't watch it, if I deprive myself of that pleasure, that won't help any of those slave workers now. I find that funny because these very same teenagers would usually claim to be very religious, to be Muslims. And of course, this is the opposite of religion, right? When one day you will stand in front of God's throne and have to face God's justice, is this really gonna be your excuse? Yes, I sinned, yes, I participated in evil, but if I had not done it, it wouldn't have changed anything. I mean, actual religion is not about being stuck, being a materialist, being stuck here in the sensual world. It is about rising above it, rising to the super sensual realm, taking God and what God wants from you, your moral duty, is more important than these earthly pleasures. As the Quran says, no one is more of a sinner than he who works the field of this world rather than the field of the other world. And as the Quran demands, you should always be one of those who act beautifully. It does not say you should be one of those whose actions have the best consequences, or you can act in an ugly manner if it doesn't change anything. No, you should act beautifully. And also, as a side note, you can very clearly see how hypocritical these people are, because especially right now with what's going on in Palestine, they are constantly attacking Israel, and they are constantly talking about how you have to boycott Israel, or you cannot drink Coca-Cola anymore, or how you cannot eat at McDonald's anymore, or whatever. And funnily enough, their argument could apply here too, right? Like, why are they not saying, okay, Israel is committing crimes against humanity, Israel is committing genocide, that is terrible, of course. But if I, as an individual, boycott Israel, it's not gonna change anything, so I might as well enjoy myself. Why are they not saying that here? This very clearly shows this willingness to boycott Israel, but not, let's say, boycott China. And I mean, China is a despotic state. China is also committing genocide, even also against Mohammedans, right? Against the Uyghur people. It's not such a, let's say, loud genocide. It's not, it doesn't involve that much bombing, but it is still a genocide. Let's remember that genocide does not necessarily mean killing. It means the destruction of a people as such. You can also destroy their culture or their reproductive means, like how many Uyghur women are forcibly sterilized so they cannot have children anymore. But these teenagers, these Mohammedan teenagers, they don't care about boycotting China, and through that you can see how hypocritical they are in both ways. You can see that their boycott of Israel is not done out of moral reasons, but out of ideology. And you can also see that their consequentialist argumentation in other cases, their justification why they aren't boycotting other things, is not their true belief, because if they truly believed that boycotts were pointless, they also wouldn't boycott Israel, but rather it's just a rationalization. But anyways, this manner of consequentialist argumentation, it also isn't new. This is also how people argued in the days of the Nazis. The soldiers of the German Wehrmacht, they didn't have to partake in killing Jews. Not everyone knows this, but it's very important. I mean, the SS, that was another matter. The SS, of course, was tasked with the extermination of the Jews, but then the SS was voluntary. There was no conscription to the SS. You joined out of your own free choice. But the regular German soldiers, when they were told to participate in the killing of, let's say, some Jewish shtetl in Eastern Europe, they could refuse. And they didn't face punishment for that. It's not like they were imprisoned or killed. They could always say, no, I'm a soldier. I will fight other soldiers, but I'm not here to kill civilians. And yet, despite that, most of them did participate in killing civilians. And a common justification was, well, if I don't do it, it's not gonna do any good. no single Jew will be safe. Like if I'm part of a unit of 100 soldiers and I refuse to kill the Jews, the other 99 will still kill the Jews, so the Jews will still die. So, in other words, if I don't do evil, it will not lead to good consequences. So I might as well participate in evil, because otherwise I would be a bad comrade to my fellow soldiers. Of course, if all these other soldiers also think in the same way, saying, oh, maybe I don't want to kill the Jews, but it's gonna happen anyways, and I don't want to be a bad comrade, then yes, everyone will participate in killing the Jews. If maybe they all followed the moral law and said, no, I don't want to bloody my hands like this, then maybe it wouldn't have been 99 still taking part and only one refusing, but rather 99 not taking part and only one doing it. And maybe that one could not have killed all the Jews. And I mean, this consequentialist logic and justification, you could apply it anywhere. Why wouldn't you be able to apply it anywhere? Why would it be justified in some cases and not in others? Some years ago, when I was younger, I spent some time chatting with strangers on some anonymous chatting site, which I found interesting. Like it would just connect you with random people without having to log in or anything from all around the world, so you could get other perspectives from other people. But of course, there are also, wherever there's anonymity, there are also lots of people abusing that. And so one time I came across a pedophile who wanted to find other pedophiles to trade child porn with. And since this was all anonymous, there was not really anything I could do about it. There was no real way to report him. But at least I wanted to tell him very sternly that what he is doing there is wrong and that he should stop. And what's interesting is the way he replied. He agreed that, yeah, sure, it's bad for the children are raped, but he said, I never actually harmed a child myself. I would never rape a child. I just watch these videos. And the videos have already been shot. They are already there. And there are more videos being shot because there's a demand for it, because people will keep consuming child porn. And if I stop consuming it, that's not going to change anything. I'm just a single individual. The videos will be produced anyway, so I might as well consume them and enjoy it. And this is, of course, disgusting, but at the same time, you cannot really say anything against the logic of his if you subscribe to consequentialism. I ask you to, because this is what Aufklärung is about, being able to abstract from sensuality, so from the manner at hand. The unaufklärt people, they are stuck with whatever affects their senses. And of course, what affects their senses can be very different. Like here we have a case of children being raped, which of course is something that causes very great harm. And in another case, you may have something which you think causes less harm, like when you are buying new shoes. Yeah, okay, maybe it's exploitation, but it's not the same as children being raped. So many people would protest against these things being equated. But what I want to equate is not the actual action as such. What I want to equate is not the consequence. Might be that one of those actions has much worse, much more harmful consequences than the other. But what I want to equate is the principle behind those actions. That is what Aufklärung is about. rising above sensuality to the level of thinking in principles, thinking in laws. What is the principle that is applied here? The principle is always one and the same. The principle is saying, I'm allowed to partake in evil, to do evil actions, if many others do the same evil, and if therefore me not participating in it, since the others wouldn't automatically stop if I stop, therefore me not participating in it will not make this evil stop. That is the logic behind it. And once again, I ask you, if this is your principle, if you are one such consequentialist, if you use this justification to say it's okay to mindlessly consume or to fly or whatever, what would you answer to this guy who, with the same justification, consumes child porn? I would argue you cannot really, as much as you would probably like to, you cannot really argue against him. I can, because my morality is not a consequentialist one. My morality is about actually being moral, actually being good, and not about whether that will actually lead to any good in the world. It's of course nice if it has that effect, but that's not what it is about. So I can argue with such people, but how can you if you are a consequentialist? But lastly, I don't just find bad people justifying their evil actions with consequentialism by saying, if I don't do them, something terrible will happen, or if I do them, nothing so terrible will happen, or if I don't do them, nothing good will happen. But rather, I also find that this consequentialist thinking is often a reason for the good people, or rather the better people at least, to not do good or to give up doing good. I know such people, I even have such people amongst my friends who do have a good heart and who try or who tried for a time to do good, maybe to care for the climate, to not waste energy, not fly, not eat meat, to not consume useless things, not take part in the exploitation. But at some point, who just end up being burned out, who at some point just suffer from resignation, from pessimism, from hopelessness, saying, oh, it's all no use. And this probably will not lead to them then just shrugging and joining the party, but it will lead to them stopping their efforts to, let's say, really change people's minds. Like there have been people who maybe were activists for a time, maybe organized demonstrations and so on. But then after a while, since it didn't work out, they gave up. Those people often retreat into their private life and they still try to be decent there, like they will care for their pets or for their family or whatever. But they will have given up on the world at large. And this is very, very dangerous, because maybe the reason that the world is so bad and not getting better is not even the bad people doing bad things. Maybe it's just the good people not doing good things. Maybe if everyone who had some decent sentiments, who wanted the world to be better, really committed to it, maybe that would already be enough to, so to say, defeat all the bad people who would not try to make the world better. Maybe we don't need to wait for the bad people to turn good, and all we would need is for the good people to really be good, to be consistently good, and to stick with it. But if you have this consequentialist morality, then as soon as you see that your actions don't immediately lead to good consequences, you might despair and give up. That is why it is so important, as I explained in the lecture on why compassion and a good heart don't make a good person. That is why it is so important to Kant that morality cannot just be based on feelings. Feelings are fleeting and changing. If you do good deeds just out of compassion, out of empathy, then that feeling of compassion can be replaced by the feeling of despair when you see that your actions don't work out. So that is why, as I explained in the lecture on the significance of character and being principled, that is why Kant would say our morality has to come not from a fleeting feeling, but from character, from us having firm principles. If I tell myself this is my moral duty, I want to commit to it, no matter what, even if it won't work out in the end, even if it will lead to my own ruin in the end, better to go down with a clear conscience and having done all I could than live on comfortably without having done what I could. If I tell myself that, then the world can look as bad as it wants. That will not harm my resolve. That will not lead to me giving up. I might be a theoretical pessimist maybe at some point. Like in my mind I might think, oh, this will not work out, this is hopeless. But if I follow firm principles, I will never become a practical pessimist. That is, I will never act as if I believed everything was hopeless, but I will keep acting as if I believed that something could be done. Consider this. Imagine your neighbor is some sort of Nazi, is a racist, and your neighbor invites you to drink tea with him every week. And now you find out that he's a racist. What will you do? Of course, you could be a consequentialist and tell yourself, well, if I stop going and having tea with him, that probably won't make him stop being a racist. So I might as well continue meeting him and as if nothing changed and just enjoy my time with him. But if you're a moral person, you would probably feel dirty just drinking tea with a Nazi, making him feel as if you were condoning this, as if you were blessing this, as if this was okay. If you're a moral person, you will say, this is not okay. I will not continue to meet with you, to be friends with you, unless you change your views. And it might very well be that you saying that will not make him change his views. So you don't know that. You should at least try to convince him. But even if it doesn't change his views, at least it means that you remain with a clear conscience. And this is what morality is about. I mean, consequentialism is really the belief that morality can be successful or it can fail. But neither is the case. Because as Kant points out, morality is not about our actions and about their result. Morality is about our will. And so it cannot fail. It cannot. I either have the good will or I don't. If I have it, then I'm a good person. What comes out of it is not completely in my power. It's partially out of my hand. Of course, if I have the good will, I would like for it to also lead to good results. But in the end, my morality, my character is not affected by whether I'm successful in my actions or not. So in that sense, morality cannot fail unless I fail myself, unless I fail to have a good will. Like people who protested against the Nazis, like the White Rose, did they fail? Sure, they didn't. They were corked and they were murdered, and they didn't accomplish waking up the German people, starting some sort of revolution. In that sense, their actions failed. But did they fail as people? They died with a clear conscience. They died as good people. They are rightfully now remembered as heroes, while those they forked and they failed to stop and that murdered them are widely remembered as villains. And this is what Kant teaches us, that morality is not simply about the others, about whether I manage to help others or not. Morality is about myself. It's about my own dignity, about what kind of person I want to be, about whether I want to be able to look into the mirror. And here again, once more, I can point you to Greta Thunberg. They already mentioned in the lecture on the significance on character that she is a wonderful, maybe the best living example of a practical Kantian. And I say practical Kantian because she acts according to Kantian moral principles. I don't know whether she's a theoretical Kantian. That is, I don't know whether she herself is aware that her morality is perfectly aligned with Kant's. I don't know if she has any knowledge of Kant, if she ever read Kant or whatever. But that is not important. What is important is that she has precisely this posture, this goodwill that says, I care about myself being a good person, so therefore I will keep going whether I'm successful with my good actions or not. She says, of course, it's very overwhelming to think about it sometimes, so I don't think about how the future will turn out, because that will be too depressing, and I wouldn't do anything except worrying. So instead of worrying about how that future might turn out, I try to change it while I still can. I don't care if what I'm doing, what we are doing, is hopeful. We need to do it anyway. Even if there's no hope left and everything is hopeless, we must do what we can. This is precisely why other climate and Fridays for Future activists, some of them, including prominent ones who maybe in their country were the face of the movement, like in Belgium or in Turkey, while some of them have given up, have been burned out, while I believe that no matter how bad it gets, no matter how hopeless it gets, I am quite sure, and I would be willing to bet on that, that Greta Thunberg will never give up. She will continue as long as there's anything at all that could be done. Because it is unaufklärdness, always being led by the senses, which is always product oriented. Like it always looks, what is the product, what is the result, what is the outcome of something. But Aufklärung, which is about thinking for yourself, and therefore not being led by your senses, by what you see, what you perceive, but rather focusing on that which you cannot see, but which you can only think, and that is the posture, right? That is the goodwill. Aufklärung focuses on your own goodwill and understands that morality is not so much about the realization of that will. Once again, of course, if you have a good will, you will try to realize it. You will try to actually achieve something. But whether you manage or whether you fail to do so does not affect your own morality, does not affect whether you are a good or a bad person. And this is ultimately what matters. As I explained further in my lectures on the categorical imperative, in the lecture on the moral law and the lecture on the kingdom of purposes. What Kant says in the end is that morality is about asking myself if everyone was like me. Like if everyone had this posture, this attitude that I have, if everyone acted according to these maxims that determine my actions, then where would that lead? Not does my individual action lead to something good, but rather does my character lead to something good? That is, if everyone had that same character, would we live in a good world? Would we then live in a paradise on earth? And as I said in a previous lecture, Kant says that if everyone was good, then even on Novaya Zemlya, so even in the northernmost polar seas on a cold island, we could erect a paradise on earth. Or if everyone was like me, would that lead to hell on earth? And the people without good character, the people who do not care about the rights of others, the people who take part in exploitation or in the destruction of the planet, the people who don't care about the basic rights that everyone should have food and water and a roof over his head, the people who hate and act from hate, they cannot complain if others do the same. Morality means not necessarily achieving good in the world, but living in such a manner that I can at least tell myself it is no fault of my own that the world is as it is. I am doing my part, I am doing what I can, and if everyone was just as good as me, then everything could be perfect. So I am at least not at fault. No matter how bad it is on the others, my conscience is clear. That is what you must be able to tell yourself. But how many people are able to really honestly, in good faith, tell themselves that? But I have yet to get into one of the main failings of consequentialism, and that is that we don't know the consequences of our actions. I can calculate what is the likely outcome of an action, and sometimes it's easier to see what is likely, and sometimes it's harder, but I can never know for sure what will be the outcome of my action. Especially if I look not just at the immediate outcome, but also at the consequences of my action, and then at their consequences, and so on. If you consider something like the butterfly effect, you don't know down the line what your action may lead to. Like maybe tomorrow a friend wants to write something down and asks you for a pen, and you offer him a pen, and then you say, keep it, I have enough. Well, maybe 2 months later, your friend is riding the bus or the subway and needs to write something down. And since he got your pen, he can now write something down. And if you hadn't given him that pen, then maybe he would have asked the woman sitting next to him for a pen. And that would have started a conversation, and she would have become the love of his life, and they would have married, and they would have had a child. And maybe that child would have been the person who found a cure for cancer. So, by giving him that pen, you prevented millions of future cancer patients from being cured and doomed them to their death. So was it now an evil action to give him that pen? Of course not. That would be ridiculous. You could not have known the consequences. You were just being a good person and offering your friend a pen. So the point Kant would make is we never know for sure what the consequences of our actions will be. The only and really only thing that we ever know with absolute certainty is what our moral duty is, what we ought and what we ought not to do. There is one famous little essay by Kant that deals with the question of lying and whether you are allowed to lie to save someone's life. Like in the essay, he considers maybe you have someone who's at your house as a guest or whatever, and now comes along another person who wants to kill your guest. And he is at your door, that murderer, and asks you, is that guy that I want to murder, is that here? And now you can say, yeah, he's here with me, or you can lie and say, no, he isn't here. And this essay and Kant's stance on lying in general, him being categorically against lying, even to save someone's life, is very infamous, and it has very often been criticized. Usually because people misunderstand him, and usually because people are stuck with their own views and are unwilling to even consider different views from their own, and to even consider that they might be wrong and someone else that they disagree with initially might be right. That's a big problem, not just when it comes to Kant and not just when it comes to this question. That's a big problem in moral philosophy in general. Most people don't approach it with an open mind. They just ask, does this person, does this philosopher have views that align with my morality? Then he must be right. Or does he have views that disagree with my morality? Then he must be wrong. And if the philosopher says something that we consider especially outrageous, like, for example, you mustn't lie even if you could save a life through that, then people will immediately say, oh, that moral philosophy is clearly wrong, you cannot take it seriously, it's disproven. Like, just by stating the fact, this is this philosopher's opinion, this is what he says, they act as if that fact alone disproved it. But the point is that he doesn't just give an opinion, he gives reasons for his opinion, and you have to engage with those reasons. I mean, in the history of morality, a lot of things that we maybe consider normal nowadays were outrageous at some time. Like, there was a time not very long ago where just like nowadays you can say, oh, Kant is against lying even if it saves lives. That proves that we don't even need to engage with Kant's moral theory. You could have said, oh, this or that person says that homosexuality or that even straight sex before marriage is okay, so we don't have to engage with him. Well, you should engage, even if something disagrees with your morality, even if something sounds outrageous, and you should be willing to consider the possibility that maybe you are wrong. That is what Kant's skeptical method is about, right? Which I discussed in its own lecture. Suspending your judgment and first engaging with the position. Well, when it comes to Kant's position on lying, I don't want to talk about that here. I will in a future lecture. It's quite important what Kant has to say about lying, about truthfulness. And there's a good reason why to him truthfulness is so important. I will also explain in my soon to come lecture on the radical evil why it is precisely lying which is the true radical evil to Kant, which is the root of all evil. But for now, I want to stay with consequentialism, and I just want to point out that one argument Kant gives in that infamous essay is precisely that he says, sure, we might want to lie in order to save a life, but we don't know if it will actually save a life. Maybe, without our knowledge, the would-be victim left our house again through the back door or climbing out of a window and is now running away from the murderer. So, by saying what is not true, but what we think is true, because we don't know that the person left, that is by saying, yeah, he's here, we would now lure the murderer inside, and he would waste some time seeking his victim in our home, which now gives the victim time to run away. While by saying what at least we think is a lie, saying, no, he isn't here, that would lead to the murderer turning away right at the doorstep, going back out onto the street, and maybe running straight into his victim, which just went out the back door, and killing him. Of course, no one can say that this is gonna happen, but also no one can say that this is not gonna happen. All we can say, Kant says, is that we ought not to lie. Besides, I will also point out, just as a side note, that Fichte went further into this case, into this example, and has a quite nice text on that, where he also points out that, of course, lying or saying the truth here are not our only two options. We could also tell the murderer, fuck off, it's none of your business who is here. Or we could also start to fight the murderer. Like, it's not just like we have to say, oh yeah, sure, your victim is here, and then step aside and let the murderer do his murder. No, we could try to fight him off. We could try to call for help, so that others will hopefully come and help us fight the murderer off. So there are more options here. But anyways, Kant's point is, you don't know the consequences of your actions. What you know is what is your moral duty, so you should stick with that. This also gives a further answer to the well-known trolley problem. I already addressed it in my lecture on human dignity. It's a very well-known dilemma in moral philosophy, right? Where you imagine that there are 5 people bound to the rails, and the trolley is approaching them and about to run them over. And you have no way to stop it. You have no way to get them off the rails. All you can do is make the trolley go onto another track. But there's a 6th person on that other track that will then be run over. Now, I already talked about it at length in the lecture on human dignity, as I said, and explained there why Kant would be against sacrificing that one person to save the 5. That would mean reducing that one person to a mere means, not having reverence for his own dignity, not treating him as a purpose in himself. But here I want to point out the big issue with the answer that most people would give to the trolley problem, because again, most people are consequentialists. Most people do think in utilitarian terms, so they would say saving 5 is better than saving 1. But is it? I mean, the trolley problem is always approached as if it happened in some sort of vacuum, like as if those 5 people or that one person, after you saved them, or after you didn't save them, or after you killed that one person, just stop existing. But let's assume their life goes on. Do you know what they will do with their lives? Maybe you thought, okay, saving 5 people is better than just one person living. But maybe that one person would have gone on, once again, to find a cure for cancer or for AIDS or whatever. Maybe one of those 5 people would have become a terrorist, would have gone amok, and would have killed not 5, but let's say 20 or 80 people. Maybe one of those 5 people would have risen to power become a dictator, start a war, be the next Hitler, start the Third World War, commit a genocide. And let's not just consider those 5 people and that one person. Let's also consider the children they may have, or the grandchildren, or the great-grandchildren. Like maybe you save those 5 people and none of them will become murderers, but maybe one of them will have a grandchild who rises to power and starts a war. So you can calculate as much as you want. You can try to be smart, to be prudent, but the truth of the matter is, and this only becomes more and more true the further ahead in time we go. Like if we don't just consider immediate consequences, but more immediate ones, more long-term consequences, the truth of the matter is you have no possible way of knowing whether, all things considered, your actions will lead to more good or to more bad in the world. Once again, the only thing that you do know is what actions you ought to do, what is your duty, and what actions you ought not to do. So you should stick with your moral duty. With that in mind, let's go back to politics once more. Because here too, or especially here, as things are more complex here, we don't know the consequences. But we do know what we ought to do. Consider something like appeasement politics. In the 30s, when the Western powers, when Great Britain, when France did their appeasement politics towards Germany, towards Hitler, did they know that this would work out? Did they know that by letting him get away with everything, by constantly appeasing him and giving him what he wants, they were preventing another world war? Well, clearly they didn't. In fact, maybe it would have been better if they had reacted right away. If they didn't let Hitler build a new army, occupy the Rhineland again, occupy Austria, occupy the Sudetenland, basically destroy Czechoslovakia. If they had said stop right at the first offense, maybe there would have been a war, but maybe a much shorter one, a much less deadly one not involving genocide. And still, we haven't learned from history, right? Because people at large, the politicians, they usually don't learn from history. They usually don't make experience. I explained in the earlier lecture on what is experience, that experience to Kant is not the same as having lived through something, but rather experience is when you really learn, right? You really need to think. Experience is not something that happens automatically by things just happening to you, but rather you have to reflect on what actually happened and why did it happen. But still, we did the same appeasement politics again against Muscovy and Putin, right? We let him do war in Chechnya. We let him do war in Georgia. We let him annex Crimea. Now he has attacked Ukraine as a whole. And still there are people who at this point are not just evil, but also just dumb. There are people who say, oh, let's go back to diplomacy, let's make peace, let's give him Eastern Ukraine, then he will have enough, and then everything will be quiet again. And I asked those people, are you sure? Are you sure this will have good consequences? Did it work out the last times? Did it work out with Crimea? Did it work out with Georgia? When we tried appeasement, when we just let Putin get away with everything? So are you sure that he won't, next chance he gets, some years later, attack the rest of Ukraine? Or attack the Baltic states or Moldavia or whatever? And let's not just consider Muscovy. What about other countries? Maybe China will attack Taiwan. Maybe Venezuela will attack Guyana. Maybe Serbia will attack Kosovo. If we do appeasement politics now, if we accept a breach of the international law and the international order, are you sure it won't lead to that whole order breaking down? To everyone else feeling emboldened to do the same? And also, many people, especially here in Germany, they always act scared of nuclear war. They say, oh, if we provoke Muscovy, they have nuclear bombs, they could react by throwing nuclear bombs. Once again, are you so sure that the course you are taking is leading us further away from the risk of nuclear war and not closer to it? Because history will not end with the war in Ukraine. No matter how that war ends, it will not be the end of history. It will probably, unfortunately, also not be the last war in history. So what about the future? Ukraine did have nuclear weapons. When it broke off from the Soviet Union, it had many Soviet nuclear bombs that were still stationed there in the 90s. And it agreed to let go of them in return for Moscow guaranteeing its borders. I'm sure that nowadays there are many Ukrainians who regret that decision, who think if only back then we had kept those nuclear weapons, then maybe nowadays Moscow would have thought twice about attacking us. So maybe this will be a lesson to other states. Maybe other states that are not superpowers, that are, so to say, middle powers, will now also think, with the international order breaking down like that, we are not safe. We are constantly threatened by our larger neighbors unless we get nuclear bombs. So maybe the lesson that many countries will take away from this is that they too need nuclear weapons, so they won't be attacked, leading to a world with much more nuclear bombs and with a much bigger likelihood that somehow, somewhere in future decades, a nuclear war may break out. We don't know the consequences of our actions. What we do know is, back then with Hitler, nowadays with Putin, what we do know is that we should not let evil happen. We should not let people get away with breaking international law, with disregarding other sovereign states, with being aggressors, with being imperialists, but rather we should stand against that. And the big issue in politics with this consequentialism is that it always looks at the future. Like, the consequentialists start from the present day, from the status quo, and say, well, considering things are as they are, we should do X. That will hopefully lead to the best consequences or prevent the worst consequences. We should not do our moral duty, but rather we should do whatever leads to the best consequences. What I never hear these consequentialists reflect on is the past. Is how did we get to this present that we have now instead of another one that we could have had? And the answer, of course, is through consequentialism. I mean, think about it. all the problems that we have in the world, all of them, and I dare you to find me a counterexample, all of those only came about through consequentialism. Only came about, and this is something that Kant says, because we didn't do the good thing right from the start. Like, once again, when it comes to the climate, when we say we need radical climate action now, we need radical changes to our lifestyle, then people will answer, oh, that's too much, that will harm our economy, that will people will not accept it, they will riot. If politicians try this, it will just drive people to vote for the right wingers next time. Well, that may be true or not, but why are we even here? Because we didn't act sooner. I mean, since the late 70s, climate change is known. So we could have acted in the 80s and 90s. We could have taken the scientists seriously back then. We could have taken it seriously when we had early documentaries and activists, like when Al Gore became, whatever else you may say about him and how you may criticize him, but when he became famous with fighting for the climate, people could have taken that seriously. Even, of course, that was already very, very late, but even just 10 years ago, when we had the Paris Climate Accords, we could have taken that seriously. Of course, the states, they didn't. They just wanted to pretend they were doing something for the climate, but they knew full well at the moment they were putting their signatures on that they didn't intend to actually take it seriously and to actually commit to their own promises. Or lastly, in 2018 and 19, when Greta Thunberg, when Fridays for Future rose to prominence, at least then, when their own children asked them, how dare you? When their own children told them, why should we go to school, care about our future, if you don't care about our future? People could have acted then. And if we had acted earlier, like in the 80s and the 90s, then of course it would have been a much more smooth, a much more gentle change. We could have taken it slower, we could have been less radical about the changes to our lifestyle, to our economy, than we need to be now. So consequentialists now are saying we can't do what is necessary, but even if they are right, that is only because earlier consequentialists refused to do what was necessary when less was necessary. The same goes for our economic ties to despotic states. When nowadays I say we should disengage from trade with China, we should become more independent, people answer, oh no, that doesn't work, we are so entangled with China, we would be ruining our own economy. And to be sure, that is true. It's not something we can just do from one day to the next. It would need some time. But how did we even get here? People never address that. It's not like we have been trading with China for the last thousands of years. This is a very, very recent development. Only really after the end of the Cold War did we become so dependent of China, because we of course only saw it as a cheap place to cheaply produce our goods that we wanted to consume back in the 90s and the early 2000s. I mean, we made China strong and we made ourselves dependent from China. Same goes for others. Like here in Germany, this was a huge problem at the start of Moscow's big attack on Ukraine, because we were, of course, entirely dependent on the gas we were buying from Moscow. We had been building a pipeline to Moscow. Why? Why had we done that? It now became a big political discussion. Oh, what can we do? How can we help Ukraine? We do need that gas. What will we do when winter comes? How will we heat? Well, we could have thought of that earlier. At the very, very least, after 2014, when Moscow already annexed Crimea. I mean, we could have tried to become independent in our energy production. That's morality aside, even from a pragmatic point of view. I don't understand why you would willingly make yourself dependent on other countries, especially on imperialist, autocratic countries that cannot be trusted. Should you try to be as independent and as self-sufficient as possible? Isn't that not just the moral but the pragmatic thing to do? So we could have tried to switch more to renewable energies much earlier, which of course would also have been better for the climate. We didn't, but we need to consider that when people now say doing the right thing will have bad consequences, that is just because we didn't do the right thing earlier. Likewise, for a long time, the politics of the West and of the US was that we need to support autocrats in the Middle East. They are our guarantee for stability. And now look how much stability there is in that region. We didn't help movements for freedom, for the rule of law when they were there. Quite the opposite. We forked them. Like, consider Iran. Now it's the big evil enemy of the West, of Israel. Well, why is there even the regime of the Ayatollahs? The Iranians tried to be democratic. But the Western powers, the UK, the US, they supported the regime of the Shah. They only talked about their oil and about Iran not falling to the communists. That is what made the Ayatollahs strong in the first place. Just like we supported Mujahideen in Afghanistan in the Cold War because we just wanted to win against the Soviet Union. And so these people were armed and trained, and now we have the Taliban there. And of course, after 9/11, the answer of the US was we have to fight a war against terror. We have to attack Afghanistan. We have to attack Iraq. Well, we know now how that worked out, right? Now the Taliban are as strong as ever in Afghanistan. And the attack on Iraq led to the rise of the Daesh in Iraq and Syria. I mean, how has the war on terror a quarter century later, how has it worked out? Has it led to less terror? Has it made the West or the United States more secure? And still, despite that, we are not learning. Still, Israel is answering to its 9/11, that is to October the 7th, in much the same manner. It's also fighting a war against terror. I mean, I really wonder, not just are they evil, that is clear, they are evil, yeah. But are they stupid? Like, have they not been around in the last 2 decades since 9/11? Did they not see what happened? I mean, what Israel is doing in Gaza is like the biggest possible recruitment commercial for Hamas that has ever been done. Even before the 7th of October, a lot of the people fighting for Hamas were orphans, were people whose fathers or uncles or brothers or whatever had been killed by Israel. What do they think is gonna happen? they think people will just forget the crimes they committed? Of course not. You cannot possibly think that this, in the long run, or even in the not so long run, will lead to anything good for Israel, will make Israel any more secure in any possible way. So that is the big issue with this consequentialism. The consequentialist always just starts from the present moment, looks into the future, says, okay, now we have to calculate this, and that will lead to the best possible consequences. And we can now not do the good action because it would lead to terrible consequences. But what he doesn't tell you is that even if that is true, even if doing the good thing now would have bad results, that is probably only because we didn't do the good thing earlier. Because we already acted in a consequentialist manner earlier. And this is why I'm not even willing at this point. I mean, I did when I was much younger, but I'm not willing anymore to engage in such discussions. I'm just refusing to take anyone seriously, especially in politics, who argues as a consequentialist. What I demand before I would engage any of your arguments is that you point me to a single current political problem that has not been caused by consequentialism, that has not been caused by people in earlier decades or earlier centuries doing something evil that they thought would have good results for them, instead of doing the right thing back then. And if you cannot give me a single such case, then why should I listen to you when your argument is, let's not do the right thing, but that which I think will have the best consequences? I can tell you exactly how that will turn out. It will make things even worse for us, for our kids, for our grandkids. We have tried it countless times now to calculate in politics, to do evil thinking it will lead to good for us. It has never worked. So why not at least do the experiment and instead just do good, just do the right thing for once in politics? I mean, what's the worst that can happen? Worst case, it doesn't work out, which is not really worse than the consequentialism. But with that, I come to the end, and I just want to point out one more thing, and that is that all things considered, if you really think it through, there are no good consequences in the end. Like, even that long-termism I mentioned at the start is not really about long-term thinking. Maybe long-term by human measures, but not from the perspective of the universe. Because in the long term, we will all be dead. And if you consider that, then nothing that happens in this sensual world, in this empirical world that we perceive, matters all that much. I mean, let's say some person dies, let's say when he's like 40, some crime, and that's a bad consequence. You say maybe you could have saved him. Okay, then he would have maybe lived another 40 or 50 years. Considering the billions of years that the universe has and will go on, what are a few decades more or less? What is even pain, even the greatest pain? What is even being tortured for years in the grand scheme of things? I mean, even the greatest pain will end in the blink of an eye, if you consider it from the perspective of the universe. So what's the point of all of this? I mean, even if you do manage to make Earth paradise, if we manage to end all wars, all hunger, humans will still die. And eventually, all of humankind, not just the individuals, all of humankind will die out. Eventually, the sun will cease to exist. The sun will swallow the earth. So, In that sense, in the long run, all our actions in this world seem pointless. It all leads to nowhere. You can maybe create good consequences for a time, maybe create some fleeting, momentary happiness, but you cannot create something truly lasting. You cannot create the eternal kingdom of God, the eternal paradise here on earth. So if you really want to be an empiricist, which is what you are if you are a consequentialist, right? You're someone focused on what he can perceive and experience, focused on what he is affected by, then you should ditch morality altogether. And there are some few cynical people who do that, right? Who may be cynical, maybe immoral, but at least they are more consistent and thorough than others, because they say nothing matters anyway. In this universe, there is no true, no lasting good, no true good consequences. In the end, we will all be gone, and there won't be some outside observer who will shed a single tear for us. It will be as if humankind had never existed. So therefore, we might as well just be selfish and think of ourselves while it lasts, and not care about making anything better, because none of our good actions will have any lasting good effect. And again, these people are at least consistent. If you really want to be a materialist, this should be your position. And this leads me at the end back to Kant's theoretical philosophy, back to his transcendental idealism. What it is in further detail, I already explained in previous lectures, especially in the lecture on transcendental idealism. Basically, Kant says that this sensual world that we experience is just a world that appears to us. And as such, it is dependent on us, on our consciousness, on us, well, being there, so it can appear to us. It is not the thing in itself. It may appear the way it does, but we don't know what it is independently of the way it appears to us, independently of us perceiving and experiencing it in that way. And so to Kant, beyond this sensual realm that appears to us, there's a supersensual realm about which we don't really know. We can't have cognition of it, because again, it doesn't appear to us. We can think it, but we cannot cognize it, because cognition, as Kant shows in his theoretical philosophy, cognition needs more than empty thoughts. It needs some sort of viewing. But there is this supersensual realm, that much we can know. And as I further explained in the lecture on the Kingdom of Purposes, we can consider it as a practical realm. We can consider it as a moral realm, as the realm of the moral world order. And we are, when we are good people, we are not just doing good actions here in this world of appearance. That's just another appearance. That's just how our goodwill appears, how it, so to say, sensualizes itself. But rather, the goodwill as such also at the same time does good in the intelligible world. And that is precisely why Kant's theoretical philosophy is needed. Why it's not just a matter of, okay, maybe this is interesting to think about, but it has no real effect on my life. No, it is needed as a sort of fundament for his morality. Kant, this is part of the revolution in philosophy that he brought about. Kant considers the practical more important than the theoretical. It's not like in antiquity when the so-called vita contemplativa was considered something higher than the vita activa. It's not that the practical to Kant just follows from the theoretical, like I theoretically understand what is true, what is false, and then I act according to it. No, rather it's the other way around. The practical is more important. Kant's whole philosophy basically results in him saying, well, theoretically, we cannot know anything beyond experience. We cannot know whether there's a life after death, whether there's a God, but we don't need to know. What we need is to act morally, to do our moral duty. But even so, you cannot just disregard or dismiss theoretical philosophy, and you cannot just follow Kant's moral principles without also following his theoretical philosophy, his transcendental idealism. Because what we can learn here is either you must be a transcendental realist and a materialist, someone who says this sensual world is the only world there is. It is the thing in itself. There is nothing else. And in that case, you must reject all morality. You must say, there is no such thing as morality. There are no good consequences that last. So I might as well just care for myself. Or you are a transcendental idealist like Kant. You say, this world is just an appearance. It's not a thing in itself. It's not what truly matters. So therefore, I don't need to overburden myself with thinking about the consequences of my actions here in this appearing world. I can focus on just having a good will in itself. Those are your two options. But being a consequentialist, so saying there is only this appearing world and the actions we do here and the consequences they have, but at the same time saying the consequences do matter, there is morality, we should strive for the good consequences, that is just inconsistent. That is a position that just doesn't work and just cannot be taken seriously on a philosophical level. My deep thanks be to my supporters, Thomas Doringer, Gernot Klaufen, Benjamin Lehning, Oblomov, Ökobong, Samet Özkilic, Elif Özün, Yasin Özün, Alexander Reuter, Lisa Rinner, Ron Suhl, as well as to all others who support me and my aufkläring cause.